Cool. All right, we have a good amount of people in here so far. And then I will mention that I did start, for any folks who are cooking along, who are so far Adriana and Lara, Karina, I did already open the 3 cans of jackfruit, and I already, okay, good. And then I already put them in a strainer. Perfect, awesome. So yeah, just to kind of get a little bit of a head start. And then if you have, since we're waiting for a few more folks right now, you could also squeeze any liquid out of the jackfruit right now. So you can just like squeeze any of it out, just so that it doesn't have any of that brine liquid that it was in the can with. And then that way, as we're prepping the other ingredients, it's easy to just start to break it down and combine the spices and the ingredients with the jackfruit. So just something
how intensely do you squeeze out the juice?
I mean, for me, I squeeze it out pretty well, just because I don't want any of that brine flavor to like linger in the dish. You don't, I mean, sometimes when we're in, working with Todo Verde, your hands get tired going through like cases and cases of it. So, I mean, you don't have to squeeze it all out till it's like bone dry, just enough to get like a lot of that moisture out of it. Awesome. And then Byrne says, I'm not cooking because I don't have the ingredients or some of the ingredients, which is totally fine. So this class is going to be recorded, and the class will be available for about a week. So we're recording the class, and then it's going to be on Zoom, on the iCloud for Zoom. But we're quickly filling up the iCloud space. So it'll be available for about like 5 to 6 days after this. So you can look at it, review it. You can also download it to your computer if you'd like, to have it for a longer period of time. So it will be there. And then, do I ever wash the jackfruit to remove the brine, is what Irvin is asking. Yes, I absolutely do. So I usually, dump it out of the can. I give it a quick rinse, which, I mean, washes off some of the brine, but either way, you're like squeezing it out. If you really wanted to get that brine out, a tip that we do with Todo Verde, not all the time because we don't always have the time or the kitchen capacity in terms of space to do it, but what you could do is you can squeeze all that brine out so it's like pretty dry, put it in a container, fill it with water, and let the brine sort of continue to come out in that water that you put it in, and then leave it soaking for a few hours or overnight. And then again, strain it out and squeeze all that water out. So that'll really like give it time to release and remove any of that brine. All right. Okay, so another thing that I just like to quickly start off with, I know some of you are familiar with Todo Verde, some of you, this may be your first time attending, so thank you so much for joining these online classes. This is something new, obviously, because of the situation that we're all in, and I'm happy that, I'm able to offer something in terms of, having these plant-based dishes still be in your home, still being something that you can eat on a regular basis. And the recipes that I'll be going through throughout the series of classes that we have, I did already include some classes for May on our website. There's a couple more classes that I'm going to add for the last 2 weekends in May. Those that I haven't added yet will include like black rice arroz con leche, raw cacao pudding, like spiked aguas frescas, and a couple others. So look out for those, and it's really easy to register online now with this Book When software, and you'll automatically get an email confirmation like I mentioned earlier. So I'll be cooking from my book that's coming out this coming Tuesday called La Vida Verde, and it has 60 plant-based recipes, including this jackfruit carnitas and a bunch of others. But this one is just such an easy dish to make, which you'll see in a few minutes, but people just like love the flavor of jackfruit. I will mention that jackfruit, as we all know, is a fruit, and we're preparing it when it's still young green jackfruit, which means that it is doesn't have any of the sweetness yet. So jackfruit is like a really big fruit, almost like the size of a watermelon, and once it ripens, it's like this really tropical, delicious fruit. And the way that we can get it here in the States, typically when it's young green, is either canned or in a jar. It's very rare to be able to find it in the States as a whole jackfruit, like you can pick up the fruit and that it's not ripe already because it's already traveled. It's probably ripened as, you know, as it's been on transit or en route to get here. So you can do so much with jackfruit, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we're cooking it, because I'll have some time to chat a bit more as it's in my pan cooking. But what I'll get started with is just showing you a couple of the ingredients that I'm working with, which I did send the ingredient list, so hopefully you had a chance to get some of those things ready. I do have, I'll start in this direction. I have 3/4 cup of oil. This may seem like a lot of oil, but the reason I use so much is because, like I mentioned, jackfruit is a fruit. It doesn't have any fat the way that pork or chicken or other meat would have. And also the thing about carnitas style dish is that carnitas is cooked in pork fat. So you want a little bit of like that fat in the dish that gives it like that lusciousness that we all enjoy. Well, me in a plant-based version, of course, but I'll enjoy in like a carnitas. I used to be like a carnitas lover back in the day. And I'm using, because I don't have another cooking oil, I'm using olive oil. I have like a whole gallon of it that I brought from the kitchen, and I don't have any other cooking oil right now, and I'm not gonna go out to the store to buy any for the time being, but I don't recommend you use olive oil if you have another type of cooking oil. Reason being is like olive oil's flavor is pretty strong. It's very unique in the flavor that it gives out. And it's also not super great for like high temperatures. And it's also pretty expensive too. So the types of oil that I would typically use to make this jackfruit carnitas are a grapeseed oil, like an organic grapeseed oil. In the kitchen, for anything that we cook, we use an organic non-GMO rice bran oil, which I know isn't readily available at a lot of stores, but it is available at some health food stores. I really don't cook with canola or vegetable oil. There tends to be like some like man-made like weirdness to that type of oil. Like canola is like kind of a strange oil. But if that's what you have right now, totally fine. But I also recommend that you look a little bit more into the oils that you're using on a daily basis and make sure that it's something natural, organic if possible, and all around good for you. So that's 3/4 cup of oil. I'm gonna start off with adding some of this oil to the jackfruit as it marinates. And the reason being is that I want to include some of that in the marinade to give it, again, like that fattiness that it requires. But then I am gonna be using some of this jackfruit as it cooks along. So you'll notice that as the jackfruit cooks, it'll kind of start to like dry out and it needs more liquid. And I'm gonna add a little bit more oil at a time. And then the next ingredient, which is my orange juice, which I have 1 whole orange here. For my marinade, I'll start with a 1/2 of an orange. And then as it's cooking, I'll add the other 1/2 of the orange as needed. The reason is because I want this carnitas style jackfruit to get nice and crispy. And if I add all the liquid now, it kind of stews, which I don't want. I want it to brown and crisp, and you'll see how that turns out towards the end. And then the spices that I have here, I have 2 tablespoons of cumin. I have cumin powder. If you have cumin seeds, you can grind that up. If you don't have cumin, you could use like a seasoning salt that you have that you really enjoy. You could use a mushroom powder, something that's going to give it a little bit of like depth of flavor or smokiness. And then I have a little bit of cracked black pepper. I have let me make sure I'm looking at the measurements here from the book. Yeah, 1/2 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes. So chili flakes, a 1/2 teaspoon. And then I have a tablespoon of dried oregano. This is Mexican oregano. If you have Italian oregano, you can use that. So again, this is just kind of the base to give it a little bit of like depth of flavor. But if you don't have these exact ingredients in your cupboard, you can flavor the jackfruit with whatever you do have and make sure that you're adding enough seasoning so that because the jackfruit is very neutral. If you have it with you now, if you can eat a piece of the raw jackfruit and you'll maybe taste a little bit of the brine, but mostly you'll taste nothing. It's very bland, and so you need to give it a lot of flavor. And then the last ingredient here that's a part of the marinade is salt. And so I like to say salt to taste because not all salt is created equal. So I'm using here a flaky kosher salt. if you have a Himalayan pink salt, or I've seen like gray salt, black salt, fine table salt, so many different types of salt that range in their saltiness. So if you're using something that's not as salty, you can, you know, just like add little by little with whatever kind of salt you're using until you reach that desired salt level that you like. So any questions about that so far? We're all good? All right, so I'm gonna show you, I'll open my 3 cans of jackfruit, which I have back here, and I'm gonna end up bringing my cutting board right up to my computer so you can see how I break down the jackfruit. And I'm going to, I already went through and started to get a head start on my jackfruit. And actually, let me turn up my, I'm gonna preheat my pan and my comal just so that they can start to warm up a little bit. So I already started to get a little bit of a head start on my jackfruit. I'll show you how I break it down, but just last time it took me quite a while to break through all of it, and I wanna be able to make sure I have enough time to cook through and show you everything. So a lot of folks already squeezed out all the liquid out of their jackfruit, which I'm doing now. And before I squeeze this other batch, let me show you real quick for those who do not have the jackfruit in front of you. This is what the jackfruit looks like when it comes out of the can. So it has a core, which is like this tip of the triangle, and then it has this top, which is like really like shreddy. And this is dripping because it's like wet from the brine and from me rinsing it, which is why I squeeze it so that, you know, now this is like more dry and dense and ready to absorb more flavor. And so what you want to do is you want to cut off, because this shreddy part is like pretty much ready to go. This is what you want your jackfruit to end up looking like when you cook it in the pan. But then this core does not shred at all. And so, but it's still edible. It's not trash. It still tastes just like this top part. And so what I do, let me bring my screen down a bit more, is I cut off the core. So this part that, you know, doesn't shred, if you try to squeeze it, pinch it, it just, you could break it apart, but it just is like, it doesn't shred the same way that you would want the jackfruit to look. And then this top part that's shreddy, sometimes it has these like seed pods inside that I like to take out and separate. This one actually doesn't have it. It's just all like shreddable jackfruit. And so once this is like this ready to go, for me this is ready, I would just toss it in my bowl of jackfruit that's ready to go. So for those of you who are breaking it down, you can start working that. And what I do is the jackfruit, the core or the seeds, I create a little pile on my cutting board, and I'm gonna get back to that in a second, but I'm gonna cut off the core, put it in my pile. I'm gonna check the shreddy part on the top. And this one, again, doesn't have too many seeds. This one has like a little tiny one, which I could chop up. It's not a big deal. But you'll see that some of them, like this one, for example, cutting off the core, putting it in my pile. And I just usually, I'm right-handed, so I usually like to put that pile on the right side of my cutting board, which I think for you might be the left side, I'm not sure. And so I just scrape it over to the side. And then this one has a couple of like these round seed pods that don't look like shreddy meat. And so that's going in the pile with the cores. So just this like round bits. These are not great examples because these are all pretty good to go. Let me grab a few more pieces from the sink so I can show you a couple more. Any questions so far as I'm going through this jackfruit? And I'm just using my 2 hands to just squeeze the jackfruit tightly. I know you can't see that right now, but let me go over to the screen. So all I'm doing is I grabbed a few pieces of jackfruit and I'm just like bringing it into my hands and just squeezing out any liquid into the sink. Or you could have a bowl where you're capturing all that liquid, but pretty much you're just trying to get as much of that liquid out so that it absorbs and takes in the orange juice, the oil, the spices. So again, I have my little pile here of jackfruit I haven't cut up yet. I'm gonna cut off the core off of this one, put it in my pile, check the top to make sure it's like all shreddy, put that in my bowl. It's ready to go. And I have a few other little round seed pods here that I'm gonna put into my pile of jackfruit that I will eventually mince up. Again, here's the core coming off, and then I'm just seeing if there's any seeds in there. Putting in my shredded jackfruit into the bowl. I'll keep doing that until it's all good to go, and then I'll show you how I end up breaking down these cores and seeds, which is just literally like mincing it up with a knife. If you have a food processor, which is what we have at the kitchen, you can use a food processor to break down those shredded pieces. And then also for knife skills here too, with your knife, your other hand that's holding onto the jackfruit or whatever it is that you're chopping, you don't want to put your fingers forward and potentially cut off any fingernails or fingertips. You want to bear claw as much as possible so that your knife runs against your knuckles and doesn't cut fingertips. So bear claw is really important. For my knife, I'm gripping the base of my knife here with my thumb and index finger. Other fingers are wrapped around the handle. If I'm ever mincing, you'll see that I'll have a flat hand, or you can pinch the top of your knife to run your knife across your cutting board. But you just want to make sure you have a sharp knife always so that it doesn't slip off of the, off of the jackfruit instead of cutting through it. This is true for any other ingredient that you're working with. You just want to make sure that you have a sharp knife that's not gonna go loose on you and cut in different directions and not cut straight through what you wanted to cut through. So you'll see here are some of the seed pods that are coming out of the shredded top part. These weren't the best examples of jackfruit because sometimes you have like really big, obvious seeds. These are not too bad. If you want to leave these in, no big deal, because they're still small enough where they'll absorb the flavor. But sometimes you get these really big ones, which I probably already chopped up most of them with the jackfruit that I chopped up earlier. But yeah, just like these bigger bits that you want to be able to break down with your knife. And the reason you want to break it down is for two reasons. I like to do it because I want my jackfruit to look like meat. Like I've been to vegan places where they leave like this whole triangle inside of like pozole or something. And when you bite into it, it doesn't taste like anything. So it's just kind of like a throwaway. It's weird. And the shape is also kind of odd. And so if I want to really fool people into thinking that they might be eating meat, I need to break this down. And I don't want this to be trash either. So what I'm going to do, you could either, if you wanted to cut one by one, you could again bear claw and cut one by one. But because you have a little pile, what I recommend is either flat hand on top of your knife or pinching the top of your knife. You're going to just run your knife through the pile of the cores and the seed pods that you have until it all breaks down and you have like little minced pieces of the jackfruit that will, the second reason, so the first was you want it to look like meat, and the second reason is because you want it to taste delicious and you want the marinade and the flavor to be coated on every single piece of jackfruit. So every bite that you take tastes really good and you don't have any of these like bites that don't taste flavorful. So the idea is that it's coating every little bit. So if I left it like this, the flavor would only be coating the outside of this. The inside would taste like nothing. So I'm gonna just keep running my knife through this until I reach that minced texture. And I'm almost there. And I'm just bringing it back into the center of my cutting board. Any questions so far?
Do you have any recommendations for good quality knives?
Yeah, I mean, I love this knife. This is a German knife. It's this company called Zwilling J.A. Jenkels. I like it because it's like a heavy knife. It's a heavy duty knife. It rocks forward and back really nicely. And like, look at how thick that blade is too. So it's easy to sharpen. It's like it's a knife that's gonna last me a lifetime. I won't need to get another knife after this. But I know some folks in like my team, some of them have Japanese knives, which are much lighter, a little bit more delicate. I don't prefer Japanese knives because for that reason, I feel like they're too delicate. Like you need to sharpen them like every second. The blade is also usually pretty thin because it's used to like cut fish and things like that. Whereas like this is meant to cut through anything. So I have this same brand of knife for both my chef's knife, which is this type of knife, and I also have it as a paring knife, which a paring knife is, let me show you. A paring knife is a small knife that you use for like precision cutting. So if I were, for example, instead of squeezing the orange, if I were gonna cut that orange into segments, so like shave all the skin off of the orange and then cut into each individual segment of the orange and get these like nice cuts, I would use this knife. Although I could still do it with the bigger knife, but this will be more accurate. I can get a little bit more into the detail because the bigger knife is obviously much bigger. But yeah, those are the types of knives I prefer. And again, if anybody has any food processor, you can just throw all the cores and the seeds into the food processor and pulse it until you get this minced texture, which is what we do at the kitchen. We don't do all this by hand. It would take forever if we did it with the amount of jackfruit that we go through. So yeah, that's a way to kind of like bypass this step and go a bit faster.
What size is the knife you're using now?
I think this size is like a, oh, it says here, it's a 7-inch. 7-inch, no stain. Yeah, made in Germany. I think the number here is like I need my glasses right here to see this. It's 38401 is like the number of the knife. My mom actually gave me this knife a couple years ago for the Christmas holiday, and she engraved my name on it, which you can kind of see there. Okay, so this is sort of the texture that I like. You can have it be a bit chunkier, a bit more minced. It's up to you. But for me, this is enough. And so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll put all this jackfruit into my bowl of the jackfruit that I already had minced up and the jackfruit tops or the shredded parts that I already added to my bowl earlier. So I'm going to bring that bowl here to the cutting board so you can take a look. And I'll show you. And anytime you're using a knife like this, you always, when you walk away or you're finished with it, you want to leave it at the top of your cutting board. So I've seen some people who like leave it like this. It's so easy for somebody to just like hit it, knock it over, and it to like fall on someone. So you always want to make sure that you leave it safely at the top of your cutting board away from you. So it's not going to fall down or get anybody. Okay, so I have my jackfruit here. So here are all the shreddy parts, right, that are ready to go. One thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my fingers to just really shred that up because I didn't do that earlier. Earlier, all I did was kind of just check for seeds, but now I just want to really shred up the jackfruit as much as possible. You can also do this when it's in the pan a little bit more with the back of your spoon or your spatula that you're cooking it with. But I just like to do this just to get it as broken down as possible before it gets onto the pan. And that way I get that seasoning that I'm about to put in here coated in every little piece of jackfruit. So I know that sometimes my team thinks I'm like exagerando, you know, because like they want to go fast. And for me, it's like, no, I still see seed pods in there. Like I want the jackfruit to be like a very specific way. And really that's how I feel like it fools people, right, into thinking that it's actually meat. I don't want like a big round ball in there. People are going to be like, wait, what is this? So I want our jackfruit to feel like very real. See, like here's one big chunk of the top here that I just want to make sure I break down. Because I could do that on like for work with Vida Verde, we cook all of our jackfruit on a big plancha. And so I could break this down on the plancha or in my pan, but again, it doesn't get all that seasoning that all these other bits of jackfruit would get. So I think I'm pretty good here. There's a few chunks here and there. But for the most part, I'm really good. It's all broken down. Here's one more chunk. And you should see the huge bowls of jackfruit that we go through. I mean, we go through cases of it. You know, we have bowls the size of like, I don't know, maybe like a 36-inch bowl or something like that, just filled with jackfruit that we're going through. Sometimes it's too much jackfruit for the bowl, so we have to use like a big pot, like a industrial sized pot, and throw all the jackfruit in there and then like get our hand in there to like mix all the way to the bottom. But people love it, and that's great. It's like a great meat alternative to play with. All right, so I'm gonna give my hands a quick rinse. Okay. All right, so this bowl of jackfruit is now gonna get hit with some seasoning. So I'm gonna throw in, again, this was 2 tablespoons of cumin powder, a tablespoon of dried oregano, a half teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes, and a little bit of a ground black pepper. So I'm just gonna sprinkle this over the top of all my jackfruit here. Set that aside. I'm gonna hit it with, for me, for this type of salt, I'm gonna hit it with a couple teaspoons of salt. But again, you can start off with maybe just like a teaspoon, which will be a little bit, and then you can gradually keep adding as you go. You can taste as you go, obviously.
Can you also use a food processor to shred the core and the shreddy part of the jackfruit, or do you recommend using one by hand?
Just the core. If you use a food processor for the top shreddy part, it's gonna just like mince it up too small. And you want to have this like cool texture of like a meat, right? Like a shredded chicken or a shredded pork. And if you throw this in the food processor, it'll break it down too much. So we've tried that. It hasn't worked for us. You have to still do that step of separating the shredded parts from the parts that are not shreddable, and only throw the non-shreddable parts in the food processor. Okay. So next thing I'm gonna add is a half of my orange. So I'm just gonna squeeze that over my jackfruit. If you don't have an orange, you can add maybe some pineapple juice if you have that. If you don't have fresh squeezed, you can add a little bit of orange juice that you may have just like in your fridge. It's kind of up to you. You can, again, I'm showing you a base of what you can do with jackfruit. And you can take this in any direction that you want to. So even if you don't have the orange juice, say you want to end up seasoning this with like a barbecue sauce, maybe you just hit it with the spices and the oil, let it cook down, and then hit it with barbecue sauce or something, or maybe another sauce after cooking. So I'm getting all the juice out of this orange. All right, and I'm gonna give my hand another quick rinse.
What brand of jackfruit do you use?
The kind that I got, this one comes from Thailand. It's young green jackfruit. This is a can here. They also sell it at Trader Joe's now, Whole Foods. Most health food stores have this. All Asian markets for the most part have this. Make sure that it says either young green. Sometimes it just says young jackfruit. Sometimes it just says green jackfruit. But yeah, any of those variations, as long as it's not a ripe one, which I do have a ripe one, and you can see, I don't know if I have it readily available here. Oh yeah, I see it. Oh, I'm gonna drop stuff. And let me show you what that one looks like. All right, so this is, you'll see, it's a jackfruit and syrup, and it's like more yellow. It's like an orangey yellow color. This you don't want to get. If you get this, you picked up the wrong jackfruit. Use it for dessert. It's really delicious. But what you want for this savory dish is a young green jackfruit, which can be picked up at a lot of places. Now they also have a lot of them where they're like pre-packaged in like a vacuum sealed bag, and they don't have all the brine in them. Those bags are a lot more expensive. You could choose to get that particular type of jackfruit. I also find that those bags usually have like a jackfruit that's more pink, even though it's still young green jackfruit, and they're a lot more squishy and soft. This has a little bit more like of a firm texture to it, but it still works for the purposes of these dishes. So you can still go ahead and use it, but again, it's a little bit more expensive. All right, and then the last thing I'm gonna add here is I'm gonna add my oil. So I'm gonna add this is 3/4 cup of oil, and I'm gonna separate it like I said. So I'm gonna add about 1/2 cup of it, maybe a little under 1/2 cup of it to my marinade. So just a little bit more than half of the oil. I'm gonna reserve a little bit of it for while it's cooking. And then I'm gonna grab my spatula and I'm gonna incorporate all of this. So I'm gonna just mix in all the flavors, making sure that I'm coating all the jackfruit as much as possible. I'm working my bowl from the outside, folding it in towards the center, and then I'm kind of pushing down. Like this part has like, it's covered in cumin, so I wanna make sure that that spreads to all the bits of jackfruit. That I'm going all the way to the center and the bottom and like really mixing it properly. And it's just about there. Needs a few more mixes here. And I can feel that my cast iron skillet right next to me is pretty hot. I had to lower the heat right now too. So if you haven't preheated your pan and you're about ready to cook, make sure you do that now. Turn it on to like a medium heat. All right, this is pretty good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and toss this into my pan. So I have my skillet here that's hot and ready to go. Let me move this cutting board so I can bring you a bit closer. And I can maybe even move this and put you on here, which I've been doing for some classes. My cute little cast iron salt. All right, so you're up close and personal here with my stove. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour my jackfruit, and I lowered it too much, but let me bring that back up. I can hear it sizzling. I don't know if you can hear it sizzling. So this is a small cast iron skillet that I have. If I wanted to go a bit faster, which I might for the purposes of this class, I could cook half of it at a time. That way I have enough space in here for it to brown fairly quickly. You could just cook all of it and pile it in here, which I guess I'm debating. I'll just go ahead and toss it all in here. It'll fit. It'll just take a little bit more time to cook, but I'd rather just be done with it, I guess. What you could do in this situation is you could either cook all of it, or you could put some of it aside in the fridge or freezer. It holds pretty well. So the main thing here, especially for this skillet that's getting pretty filled with jackfruit right now, is that I want to keep turning and playing with my jackfruit as it cooks for a couple reasons. I want to make sure that I have enough oil in there. Remember, I have that reserved oil that I didn't pour in. So as the jackfruit starts to look like it's maybe drying out or something, I want to hit it with a little bit more of the orange juice. I want to hit it with a little bit more of the oil. Obviously right now the bottom of my pan is what's going to be browning, and I'm not going to be seeing any browning on the top. So I need to make sure that I'm going to the bottom, flipping it over as needed. I can use my spatula to keep breaking down any of the jackfruit. This is going to take about 20 minutes or so to cook. And you'll start to see that right now this is like a very neutral pale color. I know in the last class, by the time this was cooked, somebody was like, did you add a color to it? Because it looked brown. It looked really brown. And no, I didn't. It's just the process of it cooking and browning that gives it that different look, that you'll start to see it like crisp up. I'm gonna turn up my heat a little bit more. So I'm cooking it on about a medium heat, and you can go up and down depending on like how it's looking. Jackfruit is really forgiving. It's really resilient. So even if you feel like you kind of burnt it a little bit, which I have done, because I like put it in the pan and I walk away and I do something else and then I come back and I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot about this jackfruit. It's still, you can still mix it in unless it's like burnt to a crisp, then you can remove those pieces. But for the most part, you can start to mix it in, incorporate it, and it'll start to like become part of this like crispy dish. Which I like my jackfruit. I prefer it a little bit more on the crispy side rather than it being kind of like mushy. There have been some recipes where I've seen that the jackfruit is in this raw state like this, and then people will mix it in a sauce. So they already mix it with like barbecue sauce, for example, and then they'll put it in the oven and cook it in the oven. And I have just found that unless it's like spread across the sheet, the baking sheet that you put it on, like really thin, like if it's like piled just a little too high, it just stays mushy. It doesn't get this, become this like kind of crispy texture. I have done a barbecue dish for my niece. She wanted a little while back, she wanted a pulled pork barbecue pizza. And even though I was going to put the jackfruit in barbecue sauce, I still cooked it like this. I still cooked it on the stove. I let it get really crispy. And then at the very end, I just threw in the barbecue sauce and brought it to simmer. But it still kept a lot of the texture. And I find that the jackfruit is just much tastier this way. When you cook it in the oven with the sauce, I mean, all you really taste is sauce. And I would still season the jackfruit with like cumin, salt, pepper, maybe some chili powder. Like make the jackfruit by itself taste good and then add other stuff to it. That's just sort of a rule of thumb for me as a chef, is that anything that you make by itself alone should be good. So like we also do like a mushrooms and mole dish or jackfruit with the pipián sauce. And the jackfruit, even though it's going to be mixed into a sauce, the jackfruit before it gets mixed in still tastes good. Like you could eat it alone. Same thing goes with the mushrooms. We season the mushrooms. We cook them on a plancha. You can eat them alone. They're really good. And then they get mixed into a sauce. So that just makes for an all around better dish. And I can start to see here, let me put that on my spatula so you can see that I'm starting to get like some brown bits on my jackfruit. So I want to keep making sure. And one thing that I notice here is that as I move the jackfruit around and I look at the bottom of my skillet, there isn't a lot of oil here. So again, this jackfruit, it absorbs a lot of liquid. And so I want to make sure that I keep adding liquid to it as it goes. The reason, again, I don't add it at the beginning is because two reasons. I don't want this to stew. I don't want there to be like a ton of liquid at the bottom and it doesn't crisp. It like just stews the jackfruit. And the other reason is when we cook it on a plancha for todo verde, if we add too much liquid up front at the beginning, it just runs off. It just runs off the plancha and it doesn't stay. It just becomes essentially food waste. So what we do is that we add enough to marinate it, and you could marinate this for a couple hours overnight. It will take on more flavor the more time that you give it to marinate, like anything else, right? And so, but then we like to add the liquid as it goes. So this for me could use a little bit more oil. It's looking a little bit dry. I'm gonna just hit it with a drizzle of a little bit more oil here. And I can hear it starting to sizzle at the bottom of the pan, even more so. And I'll keep working that in.
Are these all the seasonings you add to jackfruit before you cook it with a pipián sauce, or do you toast the jackfruit before mixing it with the sauce?
So for each different variation of jackfruit dishes that we do, we add like more or less seasoning. So for example, like the jackfruit that we cook with the pipián verde, that one doesn't get mixed with the sauce. The pipián sauce gets squeezed over the top of the taco. It's in a squeeze bottle. But that jackfruit, we add a good amount of lemon juice to it. So it's like nice and tangy. I want the jackfruit to kind of pierce through like the savory umami flavors of the pipián, which are like more heavy and like savory. And so that one is like pretty lemony. And then the pipián rojo one has a lot more cumin because I want that smoky cumin flavor to push through the pipián sauce. So each one I cook just slightly different, but really the base of all of the jackfruit that we do is a good amount of cumin. Sometimes we use mushroom powder to give it even more of a depth of flavor. Salt, pepper, lots of chili flakes. We want that little spice kick to it. Sometimes we'll add oregano, and that really is like the base of it. If you don't have those ingredients on hand, like I mentioned, you could use a seasoning salt that you have in your cupboard. You could use a mushroom powder. You could use, you know, just some like chili spices, some ground chilies or something like that to just give it that depth of flavor. So it doesn't have to be exactly this. Like I know because we're all dealing with this like, you know, COVID situation, we don't have access to go to the store like we did before as often. So, I mean, you can definitely flavor this really deliciously with a lot of good spices that you probably already have on hand that may be different than what I have here. Any other questions coming through for folks? So I'm going to hit this with a little bit more oil right now. And like I said, this would cook a little bit faster if this was in a bigger pan, or if I had a plancha, like a comal that was maybe like twice the size, going across like 2 burners. It would cook a lot faster, and you'd have to keep your eye on it a lot more so that it doesn't burn. All right. What other dishes are you looking to use your jackfruit for? Like, are there sauces you have on hand? I know in my cupboard, I have a couple like Indian sauces. I have some like Thai sauces that I could still very well like use to mix in with my jackfruit. And feel free to unmute yourself too if you have any questions. And for folks who are cooking, like I see Lara Karina who's cooking there. And then I think there was Adriana who was cooking. How is it looking? Are you starting to like smell the aroma of the spices in the jackfruit? Are things looking okay?
It's looking really good.
Okay, good.
More brown.
Yeah, it'll get a little bit more brown over time for sure. And then this could also be used, like if you were making pozole, for example, which is one of the dishes that's in this recipe, you would break down and cook the jackfruit the same way. And then I cook the maize, and this is gonna be in another class too. I think the pozole verde one is a couple weeks from now, but that one is gonna be a pozole verde, so I'm using mushrooms for that dish. But if this was a pozole rojo, I would cook the jackfruit exactly like this. Maybe just not I wouldn't add the citrus. I would just keep it more on like the spices, the oil. And then I would cook my maize for my pozole separately, blend the chiles, cook the chiles, blend the chiles, and cook the maize with that chili broth and the red broth. And then right when I feel like the maize is ready and the jackfruit is ready, I combine them both and it's ready to eat. So I don't cook the jackfruit in there for a long time and let it simmer, because again, I want that texture, which once the jackfruit gets put into a sauce or gets moist again, it loses some of that crispiness. But I feel like even then, it still creates more of a depth of flavor than like throwing in raw jackfruit into a broth and letting it just like boil. I just find that this is more flavorful, because anytime that you're browning something or you're roasting something in the oven rather than like steaming something, right? It just creates a better flavor profile. And again, anything that I want to add to something, like it alone, should taste really good. So if I just added like raw jackfruit to a broth, it would be okay, but it wouldn't be the best pozole I've ever made, right? And again, I've had pozole from other vendors. It was good, like the broth is good, but they add like the whole triangle of jackfruit in the broth. So like I'm literally like chewing into like the core and like the shreddy part. And it's just kind of like a weird look in the pozole. Like you don't want triangles floating in your pozole. You want it to look like shredded meat. So this I could see is like really starting to brown now as I turn it and work it.
Do you put orange juice in all of your jackfruit tacos?
No, I don't. Like when I do it with the pipián rojo, that one doesn't have any citrus juice. It's just the jackfruit with the spices and cooked in oil. But the ones where I want the jackfruit to kind of shine on its own, where it's not being mixed into a sauce, those are typically the ones where I add lemon juice or orange juice. For the al pastor, we add pineapple juice, because those are standalone jackfruit that maybe get topped with like a salsa or just topped with a sauce. And I want this jackfruit to just taste really good, because somebody might be like, oh, let me have the jackfruit with like no sauce. It should still taste really good without the sauce, right? And so I make sure that each batch is like flavored according to how it's supposed to be eaten and served. So this just maybe about, I would say somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes or so. I'm gonna hit it with more orange juice and oil right now. And I'm gonna let me bring my laptop over the top here of the jackfruit so you can see it a bit closer. But this is always awkward to hold my laptop like this, but you can kind of see here, like I'm starting to get some like brown crispy bits. When I flip the jackfruit, you can see that it's starting to brown. And the reason I keep working it is because I want it to brown evenly. If I just left the bottom to sit on the hot pan with oil, it would turn really, really brown or maybe even blackened while the top is still pretty raw. So you want to keep mixing it in so that it cooks evenly. And the other thing, I see how that one is like pretty brown right there. Hopefully you can see the different colors of brown. And then when I look at the bottom of my pan, it's not like a bunch of oil floating there or anything. It looks pretty dry. Like it has like a very, very fine coat of oil. And so right now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit more of my oil, and I can hear it sizzle a bit more. It turns up the heat, right? And then I'm going to squeeze a little bit more of my orange juice over the top. And it'll get nice and moist right now. And as I'm cooking, like this moisture is evaporating. The jackfruit continues to soak it in. The sugars from the orange juice help to create even more of a brown, crispy texture on the jackfruit.
Would you recommend using a mole rojo sauce as a base with this?
Yeah, mole rojo would be great. So I would still, again, cook the jackfruit similar to what we're doing now. Maybe omit the orange juice, so just don't add that. And then once it's like brown and crispy, you could do two things. You could either like heat your mole sauce separately, like put this jackfruit on your plate with maybe like rice, beans, or something like that, and then just pour the mole over the jackfruit. Or you could pour the mole into the pan once it's cooked and browned, and incorporate it that way. So sometimes I like to do like where it's just over the top, because then you really get like the crispy bits shining through of jackfruit. Like I could cook this a whole lot longer, but for the purposes of this class, I'm not gonna get as crispy as I like it. Like in about 5 minutes or so, this will be ready to go. Like you could already eat it. It already have a good amount of crispiness. I like jackfruit to be like really crispy. I find that the texture is one that I prefer a lot more. It's like not burnt, definitely not burnt, but still like this good like crisp to it. That's like where you, as you're biting it, like you feel the texture of the jackfruit, and it's not mushy at all. That's the type of texture that I like. So this needs a few more minutes. Any other questions coming up for folks?
Do you cook the jackfruit for 20 minutes before putting in the pipián sauce too?
Yes, yeah. So all of the jackfruit that gets tossed in a sauce, it gets crisped. It gets cooked and crisped up before it gets mixed into the sauce.
Maya and Mamita say that theirs smells really good.
Awesome.
Karina says she needs to stop micromanaging.
She should stop micromanaging.
And Adriana wants to make a tinga with it.
Yes. So yes, absolutely. We make tinga with mushrooms for Vida Verde, but if you were making a tinga, what I would recommend is still cook the jackfruit till it gets to this crispiness or even more crispy. And probably at this point, I would add onions to it so that those onions have time to like break down and brown, maybe even a little bit earlier, but yeah, that way it has enough time to like incorporate and kind of meld into the jackfruit. And then I would have on standby my sauce, which is tomatoes, chipotle, garlic, some oregano, which we already have oregano in here, but I know Tinga has like a pretty nice oregano flavor to it. And then when I feel like this is crispy enough, I would hit it with that Tinga sauce and just let it kind of like, because it'll kind of melt some of that crispiness that you developed, but the flavor, the browning flavor, the cooking flavor that you've added to it will still remain, which is what you want. I mean, the other part is like, it's not just that the jackfruit itself is browning and developing flavor, but these spices are like melding together. The heat creates like a nice aroma. It really releases like the oils from the seasoning and spices that you added. So all that takes time, right? And if you just add it to like a raw jackfruit, you'll get an okay dish, but it's not going to be as like delicious. And so it just takes time to like really make sure that you get the dish to be like as awesome as it could be. All right, this is slowly getting there. I'm gonna take a couple more minutes to let this continue to crisp up. I'm gonna hit it again with the remaining amount of my oil here. This was at 3/4 cups. It's pretty much all gone at this point. If you don't want to have that much oil in your dish, you could use a fraction of the oil, and like you can use a spray bottle. Like sometimes you see that the spray olive oil, the spray whatever type of oil. You could spray the jackfruit. Again, it might be a little bit more dry, but if that's what you need in terms of like whatever your diet requires, you can do that too. I have cooked jackfruit without oil before. I did a private chefing for some musicians, and one of them was like on a no oil, what was it? No oil, no cilantro was his request. The cilantro was the one that really blew me away though, because I was like, how, why? But the no oil really threw off my jackfruit game, because I tried cooking it in a broth, trying to get it to brown, and it just got like kind of dry, and the texture was just like not there at all. And so it didn't come out as well. It'll still work. It'll be better if you cook it that way and then put it into a sauce, because then the sauce will kind of give it something. But you can't crisp it up unless you use oil. So just something to consider.
I have a question.
Yes?
So when do you start like figuring out if you need more salt?
So you could at any point, like just take a little bit of the jackfruit and just taste it. And then you can feel like oh wow, like that feels really bland. If you use the amount of spices, like the cumin and everything else, you should be okay on the spices, unless you want it to be like spicier and you want to add more like chili pepper flakes or something like that. But for salt, you can keep adjusting and adding as needed. So at this point, you should be able to like grab a little bit and be like, oh wow, no, that needs salt. If your diet requires you to eat very little salt, say you have high blood pressure or something like that, or somebody in your family does, I would hit this with lemon juice, because lemon juice, when it's cooked, kind of serves a similar purpose as adding salt. That acidity gives it a good roundness of flavor. So if you're light on the salt, you can hit it with a little bit of lemon juice and it'll help create a little bit of that balance of flavor. I'm gonna just give it one more squeeze of the orange juice that's left here in my large orange. It's because I don't want this to go to waste, and it's gonna be another little bit of flavor in my jackfruit.
Is this something you can add over nachos?
Absolutely, yeah. We do this over nachos at Smorgasburg. So yeah, one of the classes that's happening in May is going to be a nachos class, and there's going to be I'll show you all how to make a really quick and easy nacho cheese. That's great with this jackfruit. Or one class that I'll eventually end up adding to is a plant-based chorizo. So any of that would be really good over nachos. Let me show you the photo of the nachos from the book. Any other questions coming through for folks right now? Here is the nachos, which are really yummy. In this particular photo, the nachos are topped with the nacho cheese that I'm mentioning that will be in a class coming up in May. Some plant-based chorizo, some pico de gallo, as well as some sliced radishes. All right. So I'm going to bring my laptop over the top of this pan so you can check out how much it's browned. Again, for me, I would let this even keep cooking a little bit more, but at this point, this is already pretty good. So let me bring this over so you can check it out. So look at how much that's browned, right? I didn't add anything to change the color. Any bits that are still pretty big here, I'm just trying to break down. As I flip it, I can see like the oil doing its thing to crisp up the jackfruit. I would just keep working this just a few more minutes. It's like at a nice heat right now. It's at a nice temperature, so it's like browning pretty well at a good pace. And I have my comal on right back here, which I'm gonna use to warm up some tortillas so I can make my tacos. So I'm gonna turn up the heat a little bit more, my comal.
What is the base for the nacho cheese recipe you mentioned?
Ooh, you have to come to the class to find out. Ooh. I mean, it's a pretty easy base. It's surprisingly, potatoes are a big part of that base. Potatoes, cashews, a few more things in there, but yeah, it's a great cheese. I have like literally fooled people into thinking that it was a real, because I've done it with mac and cheese, not just nachos. And I give people that mac and cheese and they're just like, what? This is vegan? It's really good. That cheese I've given to, family. Last year I made it over for Thanksgiving, and my brother was so upset. He's like, why do you always have to veganize everything? Like, let us have the real mac and cheese and blah, blah, blah. He was so upset. And then sure enough, he was like going in for his like third bowl of my vegan mac and cheese. And he's like, dude, this is so good. Like, I don't even need the real mac and cheese. Like, this feels real. So it's really good. It's something that you can use for nachos, for pouring over like any dishes that you make for mac and cheese if you have kids or just because you're a mac and cheese lover. So for my tortillas, right now I'm gonna just heat up some pre-made tortillas that I have from Kernel of Truth, which is, they make organic yellow corn or blue corn tortillas. And so I'm just gonna be warming up their tortillas that I already have on hand. But if I were making tortillas here at home, I could use either like Hacienda masarina, or I also do have here Bob's Red Mill masarina, which is made from an organic yellow corn. And this just requires a cup or two of masarina to a cup or two. So it's like usually equal parts masarina to equal parts hot water. I like to add a little bit more water. I feel like it's typically not enough water. I usually add a couple, like a tablespoon of oil to it and a pinch of salt. And it should be like a Play-Doh-like consistency. And then that makes really great tortillas as well.
You were mentioning before cooking the jackfruit without oil. Could you use veggie broth instead?
Yeah, so when I cooked it without oil, I used veggie broth. You're never gonna get to this here. You're never gonna get to this like crispy brown texture. It's gonna stew. What I did was I added the broth little by little so that it had something to cook in and it didn't just like stick to the pan and burn, but it never got crispy. It would just like heat up and cook, but it didn't get brown and it dried out very easily. So you won't be able to achieve this with veggie broth, but it'll still be good with veggie broth if you end up, after cooking the jackfruit, you end up putting it in a sauce. So yeah, it's just, you can't really like achieve that. I mean, if you want to eat like a, you know, depending on whatever your diet or your situation is, like maybe you cook it in like ghee if you prefer ghee or something like that, or like I mentioned, like spraying a little bit of oil, like maybe you use veggie broth to cook it through, and then you spray a little bit, like a portion of the oil, right, compared to what we used here, to just help it brown and crisp a little bit. That might work. All right.
Are all of the cooking class recipes you're doing here also in your new cookbook?
Yes, so all the classes are from the cookbook right now. I'll slowly be going through that, but the book comes out on Tuesday. I highly recommend that if you haven't pre-ordered it yet, that you get a copy of it, and then that way you'll have access to all the recipes there. And then these classes are to walk you through it, answer any questions, because I mean, I've cooked from cookbooks before, and sometimes you're kind of like, wait, what, was I supposed to do this or that? I've tried to be as clear as possible throughout the book, but if it's your first time cooking with a particular ingredient like jackfruit, it's hard to explain like every single detail of it, right? Or some of these questions that come up like, well, what if I cooked it with this instead of that, right? And so that's the purpose of these classes, which will continue once we're, you know, post-quarantine. You know, I think I've had enough people voice so far that they really enjoy these classes, and they hope for them to keep going once we're free. So that will definitely keep happening. So like, look at how much more this jackfruit has browned. So you can see the color, how much it's changed, and it will continue to crisp up as I go. And like I mentioned, it's important to keep working it, to keep moving it in your skillet so that it doesn't cook unevenly, so that you're getting the brown bits incorporated throughout the entire dish, and it's not just the bottom of your pan. All right.
Do you use nutritional yeast in your cheeses? And do you make the blue tortillas that you use with Todo Verde's catering?
I didn't hear the question about the tortillas. What was that?
Do you make the blue tortillas that Todo Verde uses for catering?
Yeah, so the blue corn tortillas that we use for Todo Verde, we get the masa from Kernel of Truth Organics, but we hand press all the tortillas ourselves. So they're usually fresh made tortillas for any event that we do. And then now I forgot the first question, which was about.
Do you use nutritional yeast in the
Oh,
chicken?
yeah. So it varies. We use nutritional yeast for a couple. I think it's probably an ingredient in maybe like 3 of the recipes in the book. We don't use it for like all our cashew creams. It really depends on like what it's going to be on. But yeah, for some of the cheeses we do use it because it adds a nice depth of flavor that's like pretty cheesy, right? So yeah, it's definitely a good ingredient that you can incorporate into, you know, any cheeses that you make, but we just don't use it for every single one. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my jackfruit for now. My pan is hot, so it'll keep browning as it hangs out in here. But this is the color I'm looking for. I can keep crisping a bit more if I wanted to. See how much it's also gone down. It's reduced, right? Because when I first started, my skillet was like filled to the brim, and now it's kind of cooked down and settled a little bit. So I have my 3 tortillas here that I just warmed up, and I'm gonna top them with a little bit of my jackfruit. And I already have, yesterday I taught a class of crema, salsas, and pipián. So I have a little bit of the chipotle salsa that I made yesterday that I'm gonna use to top my tacos. And that has a little bit of cilantro in it. I also could add a little bit of minced cilantro. I could add some onion. I don't have any onion right now, but you could add that for a little bit of crunch and freshness. So this, and I'll spread that out so it keeps browning. But the pan is off now because now I'm gonna stop paying attention to it as much and I don't want it to burn. So here are my 3 tacos so far. And then I'm going to add, let me move this over. I'm going to my tacos. I'm going to add this salsa de chipotle that I made yesterday. So it has like a nice little chipotle kick to it. It has the freshness of the cilantro. It's a tomato base. And I'll go ahead and add that to the top of each taco. And I also have some lemon wedges that I already cut ahead of time that I'll add to my dish here. So a couple of lemon wedges there. And then I can add a couple of leaves of cilantro. I like to, you could mince it. I like to leave whole leaves of cilantro on there because it just looks so pretty rather than just like mincing everything. We do this a lot with todo verde where we'll spend so much time just like taking the leaves off of the stems of the cilantro. But I mean, this you can keep all together like that. So here are my tacos, which I'll get to take a bite out of in a second. Any questions, especially from folks who are cooking right now? How is your jackfruit looking? Is it getting to the crispiness that you like?
There are a few questions. Lucy wants to know, where can we get mushroom powder and how do you use it?
Yeah, so mushroom powder, you can get, they typically have it at Asian stores. If you go to Trader Joe's, they have a mushroom umami powder. I actually have a bottle of it, which I've already used up the mushroom umami powder that's in here, and I refilled it with mushroom powder that I got from another store. I like these containers. The size is like nice to have on the counter. But this I got at Trader Joe's. And you can buy it online. I just got this other mushroom powder, which I mean, I wouldn't recommend. This is more for like smoothies because it's more expensive, but I got this from Thrive Market, which is one of the online retailers that I listed on our website on the online classes page. But this is a lion's mane mushroom powder. This is like really high in like nutrients, antioxidants, like so much. And so this I'll add to smoothies. But yeah, I have like a mushroom powder that I also got from a Surface, which is like a cooking store. This is a porcini mushroom powder. This is what I used to refill that little Trader Joe's container that I had, so that it's like easy to just sprinkle in, because this I'm always afraid that I'm gonna spill over too much, or that I'm gonna the packet will get knocked over and I'll lose some of that mushroom powder. I also do have dried mushrooms. Like these are dried porcini mushrooms that I use in soups or stocks. I also have dried oyster mushrooms. I have like a ton of different mushrooms that I like to use. I as somebody who's like plant-based, feel for people who are like allergic to mushrooms and trying to do plant-based. I think that they're just such a great source of flavor, like depth of flavor for any dish, that, you know, it's sad when people are like, I'm allergic to mushrooms. I'm like, what are you gonna do? But yeah, the mushroom powder, I add to a lot of things. If I'm sauteing, you know, some veggies, I'll add mushroom powder to it. If I'm making a broth or a soup, I'll add mushroom powder to it. I love mushrooms, so I add them to a ton of stuff. But I mean, it's you can kind of see, like, even as I'm sauteing something and I'm like, oh, that could use a little bit more, like I'm cooking cauliflower, I'll add mushroom powder to it. So I use it a lot, but you can use it as desired, just to add a little bit more spice or flavor to any dish. Other questions that are coming up? I'm gonna take a bite of my tacos here. Check that out. Looks pretty yummy, right?
Adriana says, the jackfruit is really crispy and it tastes really good. I added more orange juice. And Lara Karina says, it's really crispy, but I'm letting it cook a little longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at this point, cook it until it's the desired texture that you want. This is really good. I love it with the chipotle salsa. But yeah, at this point, like, once it's brown and you can see that it's cooked, it's up to you on like how crispy you want it. And so you can keep going, you can stop at that point, you can make the sauce and let it come to temperature and then serve it that way. But what I love about jackfruit is it's so versatile. One thing I will add that I think I mentioned at the beginning of class is that jackfruit doesn't replace a meat in terms of like nutrients. So like it isn't a protein. So it doesn't replace like the protein of a chicken or pork with the protein of jackfruit. It's very low in protein. It's very high in vitamin C. So I recommend to, you know, look for other opportunities to incorporate protein into your daily, you know, diet. So if, you know, for example, this morning I had an oat smoothie with raw cacao and like all these other things. I included dates in there. Dates have a little bit of protein in them. But you can, you know, eat your protein throughout the day. This, if I ate with the side of like black beans that are high in protein and a brown rice, like a Mexican brown rice or something like that that has protein in it, I just make sure that I'm hitting, you know, protein in other areas of what I'm eating. Because that's a question that I get all the time. How do you get your protein? It's like, I get enough of it. We don't need like a ton of protein to survive. Some people oftentimes over-consume protein, and once your body gets to a certain amount of protein that it needs per day, it doesn't know what to do with it, and it turns it into fat, actually. So if you over-consume protein, it's not the greatest situation either. So yeah. Just one thing to note with the jackfruit. Other questions?
If someone found jackfruit in the pack, not the can, that still will work well for this recipe?
Yeah, it's the young green jackfruit. You can still use it for this recipe. The texture might feel a little bit softer, which is what I found with those packages. Like, it's not as stiff and hard like the canned jackfruit, but again, it'll still work. It might even cook a little faster.
Yesenia wants to know, how do you advocate for veganism to family members and friends without alienating anyone and turning them off?
I mean, I think it's doing exactly this. Like, what I have done to get my family more on board with what I'm doing is I practice recipes at home. I get them to a certain point where, like, I know that they taste really good. And then whenever we have family gatherings or celebrations, I bring those dishes, or sometimes I'll go to my family member's house and like we'll cook something together because they also want to learn. Once they know like, okay, she knows like this tastes good, then they want to learn how to make it. And then you can start cooking together. But if you're like, they're the guinea pigs and it like you make stuff and it doesn't taste good, they're going to be like, I never want to have that again. Right. And so I try to like come correct, right? Like I show up and I'm like, I already know this is bomb. There was one time where I did make like an amaranth pumpkin pie and I had my family try it and they're like, this is trash. Don't ever do this to us again, you know? But you know, it's all trial and error, but I try to ahead of time get it to a point where I'm like, I think that they'll really like this. And then people are oftentimes asking me for the recipe because people don't want to eat vegan because they hate vegan food. They just think it doesn't taste good. And if you can show them that it tastes good without you being like, be vegan. Oh my gosh, you have to be vegan because blah, 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 whatever. If you can just like make the food and it tastes good, they'll eat it because it tastes good and that's it. You don't have to stress the fact that it's vegan. Like I said, the mac and cheese that I made for my brother, he didn't know that I was making a vegan mac and cheese until like I was almost done with it. And then he got really upset. But if he wouldn't have asked, I wouldn't have mentioned it, he would have eaten it. It would have like never come up. And then he would have just liked the mac and cheese, right? And so I think you have to kind of just like perfect your recipes and work on them and anything that you can do to veganize a recipe that you already make a lot with your family that you know that they like is like a bonus because it tastes similar or the same and it's plant-based.